Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we'll be talking about the recent protests that have been happening in Belarus and how it's going to be affecting the whole economy of Belarus. And in a recent article that I read, which is called Economy in Recession as Protests Continue in Belarus, we will be talking about the economic side of it, but as well as the protests in general. So let's begin. Before I get into the economic part, let me first discuss Belarus in general, so just so you get a better understanding of why these protests have been going on. So Belarus is located, well, it's in Europe, and it's located right beside Russia, Ukraine, and Poland. And as you can see in the picture here, and it has one of the longest serving presidents in the world. His name is Alexander Lukashenko. Now, he's been serving for 26 years, ever since 1994. And essentially, Belarus has a command economy. Now, this is an important concept that we'll be discussing furthermore. Belarus has a command economy where the state controls the enterprises, so everything that happens with manufacturing and all of the businesses, as well as it gets to censor a lot of the news. So essentially what the people see is what the government wants them to see. Now, let's talk a little bit about the protests because this is a significant thing. So these protests began on August the 9th, right after the election, the federal election that happened there between Alexander Lukashenko and also Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, which is his direct opposition. Now, it is said by Alexander Lukashenko that he won this election somehow by 80%, despite majority of the Belarusians not believing in him and just disliking him ever since because he essentially was there in power for 26 years and he's stopping from businesses to grow, as well as the cost of living and the cost of everything have essentially skyrocketed. So Alexander Lukashenko says he won by 80%, while Svetlana Tikhanovskaya said that she won by around 60%, and that's what the opposition are saying. So major protests have begun simply because people have been tired of living under this regime, right? They're not able to provide for their family. Just a fun fact to give you: a minimum wage income in Belarus is around $115. Now, if you rent a one-bedroom apartment outside of Minsk, which is the capital city of Belarus, outside of that, you will be paying around $250 a month for one bedroom apartment. So that means a minimum wage worker cannot live in Belarus, and hence this has forced a lot of people to go abroad and work in either Poland or Ukraine in order to obtain more money. Now, these major protests have been absolutely extraordinary, as over 50 to 100,000 people have went out and protested in the capital city of Minsk, and there have been even more in other cities, as well as 17,000 people have been arrested. And ladies and gentlemen, this is not that regular arrest where you sit in a prison cell. No. Imagine 50 to 100 people being in a jail cell and the police coming every night and battering them and beating them just for no reason, just because they moved to the left side or to the right side. And in addition to that, they have all been malnourished. And this has been just outrageous. And this is why the protests continue to get stronger and stronger. Now, to talk a little bit about the economic side, right? And to talk about the article, which we're going to be doing right now, right? So there are 3 points, 3 major points that have affected Belarus in the recent month and a half. So first of all, their exchange rate from dollar to euro has risen from 18 to 27%, which means that this has ultimately caused the devaluation of the Belarusian ruble. That means that it essentially costs either pretty close to nothing or nothing. And just to give you some perspective, right? Because this is ultimately the main cause or one of the main causes of inflation, right? Before, if we take, let's say, a good such as meat, before the Belarus, if you were to buy meat in Belarus, it would cost you a lot cheaper. Now, to buy meat in Belarus, it would cost you practically the same as it would in Canada. So we're talking about around $16 to $20 for the price of meat, which for a minimum wage worker who earns $115 is absolutely out of the question, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why this is such a big crisis. In addition to all of this depreciation, a lot of Belarusians are feeling scared because, well, the Belarusian ruble is going down. So they're essentially depositing and taking out all of their money out of the major banks. So we're talking about in the last month and a half, $226 million have been taken out of the National Bank of Belarus. Now, this has caused the banks in Belarus, especially the National Bank in Belarus, to invest in gold because a major principle in economics is that when a currency is devalued, so it goes down, the prices of gold go up. So it always essentially balances out currency. So this is what the national banks have been doing, which is fairly significant, as again in states that there has been major rates of inflation in Belarus. But ladies and gentlemen, that's not all, right? The major thing is that a lot of people in Belarus have stopped enterprises. So manufacturing companies have simply stopped, and this accounts to majority of the Belarusian economy. And hence, because of that, supply has went majorly down, while as the demand for a lot of these products is also going down simply because people can't afford them anymore. People can't afford meat. And the only thing that is still reasonably cheap is bread in Belarus. But that's not enough to sustain your family. So you're already seeing the problems that we're facing in Belarus. Now, this is also a perfectly elastic demand as price went up, right? But the demand for that went absolutely down. So again, it shows that this is a perfectly elastic demand. Now, to talk to you about whether this is a case of macroeconomics or microeconomics, well, this is definitely macroeconomics, as this is impacting issues such as high unemployment rate, as a lot of people have just left their jobs to go and protest against Alexander Lukashenko and his regime. And in addition to that, there have been major issues in terms of inflation, as the price of everything, the average price of everything is going up. So this is causing major problems for the Belarusian people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're probably wondering, well, Farouk, why should citizens, government officials, businesses be concerned with this issue? And I'll tackle it from all points of view. So first of all, for citizens, why should they be concerned? Well, because all industries are going down, this means that a lot of them won't have work, and a lot of them won't be able to pay their bills, pay for rent, pay for food. And that means they won't be able to sustain themselves, which is a big issue. And ladies and gentlemen, in the name of Game of Thrones, winter is coming, right? Belarusian winters are some of the coldest winters, and hence it'll get even worse. And will these protests sustain? That's another question that we'll be talking later on in this video. From the perspective of businesses are concerned of whether they should be moving either into the Western world or to China, or whether they should just stay in Belarus and wait this out, because they're not sure of what to do, and they're not sure if who's going to win, whether the opposition will win or Lukashenko will win. And this is why this is a major plot point for businesses. But that's not all. If you're a consumer, this impacts you as well. As if you're living in Belarus, the price and the inflation, the average price of things is going tremendously up, which means that you're not able to afford much. And this is causing major problems for the Belarusian people. Now, for the major questions, and there are two major questions that you may ask from a consumer's or citizens or a business perspective. The first one being is, will the UN, so the United Nations, or will the US, or will one of the major countries get involved with this conflict? And will they help to resolve it? Or will this turn into another Ukraine situation where, in terms of Ukraine, Russia was able to do whatever they wanted to Ukraine, and there weren't really necessarily too much action? So will the UN put major tariffs? Will they implement some type of system to remove Lukashenko? And those are major questions that the citizens, the consumers, and the businessmen in Belarus and outside of it have been asking for months now. And we'll get to see it in the next couple of weeks, depending on what will happen with the Belarusian people. The second question I have is that, are we going to see major revolutions in countries that have been part of the Soviet Union? Simply because if we look at Belarus, Belarus started another in some sense, Belarus started another protest in another country called Kyrgyzstan, where they have just abolished their president simply because he was not delivering, and there were major inflation rates, and essentially, COVID and other factors kind of revealed all of these dictators and presidents' weaknesses, right? So, will there be major revolutions in post-Soviet Union countries? And how will that affect businesses? Will businesses be moving outside? And this is sort of my second question to my second question in that sense. But will businesses be moving abroad? Will they be moving to the Western world? Will they be moving to China? These are all questions, these are all great questions that need to be answered. Now, in addition to that, right, you're probably wondering what's one of the research tools that could be used to measure and to know for the United Nations and for America whether to step in or whether to wait it out for a few months or see how like everything goes. Well, I believe the major thing that the United Nations and the US should look at are the GDP per capita. Now, the GDP per capita essentially will say how good your economy is doing and how people are essentially benefiting from that economy. So, if the GDP per capita in Belarus falls, right now it's currently at around $6,209. If it falls tremendously, which it did during the time of Ukraine and Russia conflict, then I believe that that is the time when the United Nations or the US or the Western world has to step up and has to show to the world that they are involved and they do want to abolish dictatorship and presidents who do not deliver for their countries and have been torturing their citizens for, well, in this case, 26 years. Now, as for solutions that I would bring to the table personally, well, there are two. I believe that the United Nations and the US have to get involved in this conflict. Simply because if we want to abolish this dictatorship and these concepts of command economies and these things that have been plaguing the Western world, such as Russia coming in and disturbing the federal election, the presidential election in the U.S. We have to start small, and we have to start by helping out these countries that are fighting against dictatorship, such as Belarus, such as Kyrgyzstan, that are doing right now. And hence, I believe that if the U.S. and the UN step up to the plate and help these countries get back to where they should be, I believe that this would be a major contribution to the world and one step to lessening dictatorship in our world. In addition to that, I believe that these major countries such as US and the United Nations in general have to support these movements with goods and services, because the main reason for why these movements might lose fire and might lose steam is because people just won't have enough food to sustain themselves. But if United Nations or the US or Canada provide major support to Belarus in terms of goods and services, in terms of food, in terms of clothing, then these protests can continue, and essentially dictators and presidents like Alexander Lukashenko can be abolished and freedom could finally be restored. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude this, there have been major protests happening in Belarus that have affected them tremendously in terms of inflation, as majority of the people can't afford it, right? The minimum wage, again, in Belarus is $115, while as meat costs $20, or to rent a one-bedroom apartment costs $250, right? So this is what has been caused by some of these dictators, and this is not the way to move forward. And that's why the Belarusian people must continue to protest and must fight for their freedom. And the United Nations and the US in Canada and the Western world in general has to support these movements in order for us to abolish things like dictatorships and to move forward in the democratic world. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you enjoyed it.